Hello and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca and today I'm on my way back from a little local cars and coffee meet this morning and some lunch with some friends. So making the most of a lovely day out and some nice weather that we've had recently. My quirk of classic car ownership for you today is just what interesting and unusual places these cars can get us if we want to. I had quite an experience of that last week, which is what we're going to be telling you about in the podcast today. So if you follow me over on my social media, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. You might have seen that me and Peggy had quite the adventure last week. We were quite pleased that we've had quite a quiet weekend all together, because during the week last week we had a little bit of a surprise last minute adventure. On Tuesday of last week I got a text from Steph of iDriver Classic, and she was asking me what I was doing on Thursday, and I responded that I was at work, and she basically came back and said, but do you need to be? Could you get it off? Because there's something happening up where I work that we think you might be interested in doing. And as it happened, the kind of big deadline that I was working towards at work was on the Wednesday, and I technically had some toil, time owed in lieu, left over from earlier in the term when we'd had lots of open days and things on. So I had a chat with a few people and said, actually, yeah, I think I can come on Thursday. What's happening? And she basically came back and said, well, there's an invite-only thing happening at the Motorist, and you need to be here for about 10:30. We'll be going out for a classic convoy drive, hopefully, and then back to the Motorist, and then there's a black tie evening do if you want to stay for that as well. So I thought, well, as I'm up there, I might as well. So Thursday morning came around and me and Peggy packed ourselves up. We'd had to do some kind of last minute pulling stuff together the night before after work, in terms of getting hold of a few pieces of clothing and things that I couldn't find, and then loaded ourselves up on Thursday morning, and we set off from home at about 8 o'clock-ish. We had to pull in quite quickly to fill up with petrol, and then we hit the A1 and travelled on up. It was a reasonably good trip up the A1 actually, not too much problems in terms of traffic or anything, pretty steady cruising all the way up to the Motorist really. Pulled in to a little petrol station not far from the Motorist, and then filled ourselves back up again, because obviously we'd need some more fuel for the drive, and then made that last little bit of a trip into the Motorist. And it's all changed massively since I was last there. I was last up at the Motorist for their Christmas Eve event with the Morris Minor young members, so I hadn't been in a really long time, and the Arnage that we were going up to celebrate the opening of was still kind of a big building site, and the car park was very different, and we've got now like a one-way system as you come into the Motorist now, which wasn't there before. So I did mess it up a little bit as I pulled in, because I was so used to pulling in next to the front of the garages and where the old cafe used to be. But I pulled in, and got myself parked up in front of their beautiful new building, and spotted Steph over in the distance, and a few other people that I recognised. I recognised that 2 cars down from myself was a very noticeable brown Morris Ital that belonged to Sarah Crabtree, and then next to me was a Austin 18 that I recognised from when Steph had done a video on it on her channel. And not long after I'd kind of got out of the car and started getting myself sorted, Ian and his dad from Pop Bang Colour arrived in convoy of the studio and their little van. So there was a few people that I recognised, but also Steph was kind enough to introduce me to a few other people. The owner of the Austin 18 for starters, Mark Wells, and David, who owned a really lovely Standard, as we were all kind of be grouped together in the drive because we were kind of the classic car contingent that was there for the day. A lot of the other cars that I was noticing in the car park were more in the supercar category, quite a few Porsches and Aston Martins parked up there. So got introduced to everyone, started having a little bit of a chat, and whilst we were having a bit of a chat, Ian said that he had quite liked to take his mobile studio on the drive, but unfortunately that meant that there was only 1 seat, and if he only had the 1 seat, then he couldn't give his dad a lift, and his dad didn't really want to drive round anymore given that they'd come up from Coventry that morning as well. So he asked initially Sarah if he could get a lift in with her, but we were all going to need navigators ideally to know our way around the route. So I offered that he come with me and act as a navigator, given that I hadn't got one. Jamie hadn't been able to get the time off last minute like I had, so the drive up had been my own drive up by myself, so I thought it'd be quite nice to have some company for the drive. And Ian's dad, Richard, was pretty happy with that. Hadn't been in a Morris Minor for quite some time, so he was quite happy to have a go in one. We were then all kind of called up into the upstairs of the new building, where they announced that there'd been a couple of little changes to the route, so we all got updated routes, and that we were, when we're ready, able to kind of set off, and that the plan was for us all to kind of make our way around this set route to Rudding Park and have a lovely lunch picnic there, and then drive a different route back. So that was kind of what we had, what they had planned for us during the day. So after that, it was kind of a scramble back to the cars to get ourselves on the road. I say a scramble, but I think those of us in the classics decided it was possibly going to be more enjoyable if we let everyone with the really fast cars go on their way, and then we'd kind of set ourselves off after that. So we had a little bit more of a chat, then set off on our route. The motorist had sorted out that we had a Google Maps version as well as a paper copy for us to follow. So between it, we still messed up. We didn't quite get it to plan, but we did end up kind of vaguely getting there. It was a really nice drive for quite a lot of it. We were going across some really scenic little villages and things like that. There was a point where we got stuck whilst the tractor was reversing into somebody's garden down this tiny little narrow lane. There were some really interesting bridges that we went over, and part of the route on the way there led us into the centre of York, and I'd really wanted to take Peggy to York at some point, so we can tick that off and put the patch on the blanket now for having been through York, because we drove right the way through the middle of it, and right close to the Minster and everything, so it was really nice to kind of be in and amongst such a beautiful city and see quite a lot of the tourists there enjoying seeing us all drive around, because at this point we were just about in convoy with Ian in his studio, and a few back from that was Sarah and the Evoke girls in her Maurice Hotel, and we saw them in our kind of wing mirror briefly, and then I made a wrong turn in the centre of York and we had to do a big loop round to correct ourselves, so they managed to get ahead of us and beat us to Rudding Park. We were one of the last to arrive, but it was a really nice drive over there. Had a really nice chat with Richard, and lots of kind of stories to share about cars and various other things. And he was doing an excellent job of doing a little bit of filming on his phone and then a little bit of kind of filming with the cameras. Oh, actually, on the way there, I think I was filming with the camera set up here to get us both, and then sometimes the road, as I'd done on the drive up the A1. But he did some filming for us on the camera on the drive back. All in all, it was a really nice kind of drive over there, and we, even though we were the last to arrive, we did make it in time for the lunch, and we were able to kind of sit out in the sunshine because it had really picked up. It was really quite a lovely day by this point. Sit in the sunshine and pick through our picnics, and the picnics were all slightly different, the little boxes that we got, so it was a little bit like being at school and swapping and exchanging what bits we fancied from each other's lunch boxes. Now that us classics had got ourselves reunited, we decided to try and work a little bit harder to actually convoy on the way home, and to make it stick together a little bit more. So once Sir Alfred the Austin had got some water filled up in the radiator, we headed out behind the Orion that was owned by the guys from Kelsey Media, and then it was us, then Sarah in her Maurice Hotel, and then Alfred the Austin. But we got into Harrogate, which was kind of the first big town that we were hitting as we were going through, and typical me, we'd already lost the Orion and I was about to make a wrong turn again, but luckily Mark, the driver of Alfred, Sir Alfred, knew kind of where he was going, so he kind of managed to pull up beside us at a junction and make a kind of different turn and correct us all that way, and we ended up following him all the way back. And we'd had quite a big hill on the way to there, and I'd managed it really well, and there's thankfully a video clip that was caught by Richard from the passenger seat of us making it up that hill, and it was definitely the biggest hill that I've done, and we made it. We did stall a little bit at the top, but we managed to pull off with minimal issues, so that was a relief. And I said to Richard once we got to the top of the hill, I'm so glad you were filming that, because there's no way that anyone would believe that I'd made it all the way up here, given my history with hills, if it wasn't caught on camera. So hopefully if you've been watching on the YouTube, you've seen my success of going up this hill. And once we got into Harrogate, we were able to go back down that hill, which was far more enjoyable, and then use that momentum from that hill to hit another hill with quite a good speed and momentum. So that's always a bonus when you're driving around in a classic car. And I have to say, Sir Alfred was, despite being far older than Peggy, was far more adept at doing hills than her. So we definitely need some practice. Unfortunately, the big fat flat fens the big flat fens around here don't give us much opportunity to get a lot of practice. But it was a really enjoyable drive back again. We managed to stay in convoy all the way back to the motorist, and we got back to the motorist at about 4 o'clock, half 3, 4 o'clock. It had been a really good drive, and by this point I think I'd been driving for maybe about 5 hours, including the 2 hours drive up there and then the hour and a half either side of lunch. So it was some good practice endurance driving for me, really. But we got back, got ourselves some drinks and rehydrated after quite a warm drive in the sun. Had a little bit of a chat before. Some of them headed home if they were local to get changed, or if they'd got hotels booked, they headed off to those. And myself, I headed and asked the staff member where the largest toilet was, cubicle was, for me to get changed. And they pointed me in the direction, and I did a miraculous kind of change from my daytime attire into my black tie event outfit, and then headed back outside. And when I headed back outside, I noticed that some really beautiful pre-war cars and 50s cars had parked up, and they'd started to park up a few of the other supercars in a nice formation around the new restaurant and events hosting space. So there were some new cars for me to have a nosy about, take some photos of with my film camera, and just really enjoy the lovely location. People started to gradually come back from having gotten changed or swapped cars, in the case of Mark, who had taken Sir Alfred back because his headlights weren't going to be the most amenable to the lack of daylight, and he'd come back in his Triumph Dolomite Sprint. And we were all ready for a lovely evening, and people started to be handed out champagne and Prosecco. I was on the soft drinks because I was hoping to make the drive home that night, and they started bringing around kind of little canapes and bits of food and things like that, which were really lovely, and a huge change to kind of the sort of stuff that I'd had at the Motorist previously, with some really nice options there. Eventually we were all kind of called in to the new space at the Arnage, because they'd got a special guest speaker to kind of come and do a speech and a Q&A at the new building to kind of welcome the opening of it. And the celebrity guest was, undoubtedly, if you follow me on Facebook and stuff, you'll have seen Quentin Wilson. And that was kind of one of the things that Steph had said, look, there's going to be someone you'll want to meet, come in, if you can get the time off, you'll want to come. And she was right, because I remember watching kind of the Cars the Star and things like that when I was younger, and it was a really cool kind of thing to hear him do his speech, hear him answer some of the group's questions, and then he presented 3 awards. One was the motorist's favourite car, one was the Rudding Park's favourite car, and one was his favourite car of the kind of collection that was there. And unfortunately, neither myself nor Sarah's Morris got a mention, so we decided that we would have to kind of take him outside to realise how wonderful these Morrises really were. So Sarah, who had had a few more Proseccos than me, so was a little bit braver, went up and with me in tow and said, look, you've got to come outside, get some photos with our cars. And I thought it would be quite a brief thing, but actually he spent really quite a lot of time, something like 40 minutes with us outside, in between kind of him doing that and then starting the auction. that came a little bit later. And he had a good chat with us about our cars, asked quite a few questions, and I had handed my camera at this point to Jo from Evoke, who had been kind of with Sarah in her car, and I'd handed her the camera to take photos of me and Quentin by Peggy when we'd kind of finished talking. But she's obviously a pro at taking photos and knowing what things we need to get photos of, because she took a photo of the moment that I told Quentin Wilson how many miles that I cover in Peggy in the kind of 2 years that I've had her. And it was just a fantastic shot, perfectly timed, as well as kind of quite a few other photos that is kind of really nice to have, of us kind of having a little bit of a chat and discussion about the cars. Then we got kind of the lovely posed photo of us at the back of Peggy, before he had to go off and talk to a few other people, and then do the auction. And the auction was being held in aid of the Red Cross's Ukraine appeal, and they had some really fantastic prizes to kind of be given away, bidded away, including stuff that had never previously been offered for sale and would never really be offered again. So that was really wonderful to see so many aspects of the car community coming together to donate for a good cause, and then people making generous bids for them. And then it got to kind of about 9:15, and I realised that it was going to be another 2 hours or so before I was back home, so I really ought to start saying my goodbyes and heading back home. So I finished off my glass of water and started saying goodbye to the people that I could. Unfortunately, Steph was very busy, still in the middle of the auction, so I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her, but it was nice to be able to say bye to some of the lovely people that I'd had the chance to spend the day with, and hopefully going to see at a few more events this summer. Got myself over to the car, changed out of my heels into my Doc Martens, wound down the windows and set off. It was very surreal driving back on a virtually empty A1 all the way home. There was kind of barely any cars, very few lorries. For long stretches of it, it was literally just me and Peggy and a very open A1, and it was really nice. We got to about an hour away from home, pulled into a petrol station because we needed to kind of one last top up to get us home safely, and I think the guy in the kiosk at the petrol station was very confused because it was not far before midnight, and I pulled up, and I don't think he had been expecting to really see anybody that late on a Thursday night, and kind of stood there looking through the window at me very confused, and I took a few photos and things, and then started filling up the car, went in to the petrol station, and he said, "Have you been travelling for a long time?" And at the time, I just kind of responded, "Yeah, actually, I've been out for quite a few miles today, covered something like 400 miles, and I've still got to get home, which is about another hour away or so." And he was quite surprised. He was like, "In that, really?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, it's been quite comfortable," and it really had. It had been not any real issue, quite comfortable, and I wasn't kind of feeling tired or anything, which is quite unusual. I think I was just really buzzing off having had such an exciting and interesting day, that I was just thriving off adrenaline and things, because it was really such a lovely day out. It's since been pointed out to me when I've told my friends this story of the man in the petrol station, that he perhaps thought I was some sort of time traveller, and he was having some sort of like weird vision, because when he'd said to me, "You've been travelling for a long time," it may well be that he thought I'd been travelling through a lot of time. All in all, I'm sure it made his night a little bit more interesting, and I got home just after kind of 1 o'clock in the morning. Peggy parked up, tucked away, and then pretty much straight into bed to tell Jamie some of the exciting things that I'd done during the day before getting some much needed sleep. So we'd been out really from about 8 a.m. through till 1, and Peggy had done a really fantastic job, all in all. Minimal issues, nothing kind of too untoward, and had managed some hills far better than we ever previously had, so that was an achievement. And had a really nice day meeting some people that we'd kind of seen and spoke to vaguely online, but again hadn't really had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with in person, and so that was really nice. And it's so lovely how welcoming the car community is when you kind of turn up to these things alone and not really knowing anyone. You really can find a way to fit in at any time. So overall, we covered between kind of 450 to 500 miles in that day. It's difficult to tell because Peggy's speedo doesn't read quite right, and we did a slightly alternate drive back than the measured one that we were provided, but was a really fantastic day. I think I was driving for kind of about 7 hours, which is some nice endurance training ready for the trip over to the Lake District later in the year. And on top of that, I had a fantastic day, having some really unique and first time experiences for me. So really glad that A, Steph thought of inviting me, and B, I was able to take up that opportunity. Really felt on quite a lucky experience. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about our little adventure. I'm hoping that we're going to have loads more adventures coming up in the next few months and the rest of the series. We've certainly got a lot planned. If you've liked hearing this and want to kind of, and it's your first time here, make sure that you're kind of following or subscribing or whatever it is, depending on what platform you're hearing this podcast on. And in the meantime, drive safely and happy motoring.